Hello, this is the 1 month and a bit follow-up for my review of the Spyderco Ikuchi. So my review process is that this is my own personal knife. It's my own money tied up in the knife, and while I am a fanboy of Spyderco and Paul Alexander, I'm just going to talk about everything, including the good and the bad. So starting off from the beginning, assuming you didn't watch the other video, quick specs. The close, the knife is 110 millimeters or 4.35 inches. Deployed, the knife's overall length is going to be 193 millimeters or 7.61 inches. The blade is going to be 83 millimeters or 3.26 inches, so just over 3.25. And the cutting, when I measure it, I follow the entire sweep of the belly, and it's 84 millimeters or 3.3 inches. The thickness of the knife is going to be 9 millimeters or 0.35 inches. That's comparable to a Spyderco Paramilitary 2, that kind of a knife. And then the last thing is going to be the blade stock is 2.5 millimeters of CPM S30V steel or 0.098 inches. So I was trying to get a little bit of a close-up on that. Is Taichung Taiwan and Spyderco S30V. So the knife is Spyderco Taichung Taiwan. That's where, if you're a Spyderco person, that's where some of the better knives and a lot of their collaboration pieces are coming out of. So it's to me, Taichung Taiwan is a good thing. So what have I been doing with this knife? So the first 30 days of ownership and use, I was using this as a dedicated EDC, and then I decided to extend the review process a little bit longer and carry this guy in rotation. So the first thing we're going to do is basically a quick size comparison with the Spyderco Delica and a Victorinox Pioneer, because everyone has a Pioneer, or Soldier, they're all same. So you can see that the Ikuchi is just a little bit bigger than the Victorinox, but it is the same size as a Delica. Deployed, however, is quite a bit of a different story. So the Ikuchi does have a significantly longer blade than the Delica. So again, the Delica, putting the handle material to handle material. So you can see that the Ikuchi does have a quite a bit better, longer blade, and then Victorinox on top. So that's the size comparison. I'm pleased with the carry of the knife. The slender form factor does lend to quite a nice gent carry, and I've had no issues with it. So while it was in rotation, it was competing with, this is a Boker Plus Kwaiken, and I also, at the same time as the Ikuchi in the same box, I had a Spyderco Smock, and I was also using my Skaha, and the last knife that I always use, is always in rotation, is my Spyderco Hungarian. So how did this knife kind of fare compared to these knives? I found that the Smock, while I absolutely love this knife, it was more of a fidget toy knife for me versus a user. So I actually haven't cut much, if anything, with the Smock. Whereas these three knives, I'm not afraid to use them and actually cut things. So these three knives were my users, and I did find that it was really usually coming down to these two knives being the ones that when I need to have a cutting task, when it was a rotation period, I was going towards these two knives if I knew I was going to have to do a bunch of work with them. This is an amazing knife too, by the way. I'll try and do another video on it later. So back to the Spyderco. So yeah, the knife carry, I found that while it was in rotation, I was preferring this knife over others in rotation when I had some, like, I knew I was going to do a lot of cardboard cutting or breaking down boxes, cleaning things up. I found that I did prefer this knife just because it was, after a month of carry, it's just so familiar in your hand, you kind of get that muscle memory for where things need to be, and I was defaulting back to this knife. Going for the good, bad, ugly, starting from the back to the front. And also through the month of use, it broke down probably around 60 cardboard boxes, took out a few suckers from trees, things like that. So I would consider it a light to medium use month. I did 0 prying tasks, so I wasn't trying to take staples out of fence boards, things like that. So this was a slicing only kind of month and use case on this blade. So good to bad, back to front. Good things for me is no lanyard hole. It kind of bugs me how Spyderco forces lanyard holes on every single knife they make. But no lanyard hole, fantastic. Clip, I love the wire clip. That's deep carry. It's great, but I did notice that the handle material is a G10 with a carbon fiber peel ply applied to it. The carbon fiber out of the box was quite grippy and nice. It was just that nice balance between retention and easy to get it out. Over time, though, I found that it actually smoothed out quite a bit here. And while I was sitting on a couch, this guy was just kind of squirt out of the pocket a couple times. It's not great if you have kids in the house because your knife is on the couch, not where it's expected to be in your pocket. So I did notice that the out of the box retention was fantastic. It was great, but over time the carbon fiber does smooth out quite a bit, and it's nice in the hand, but it does impact the retention a little bit. I tried tightening down the screws on this guy, and it didn't change it at all. These guys are as tight as they'll go, and it just doesn't affect the retention on that. So that's one thing to consider, is that you might end up losing this in your car seat over time. If you do carry this a lot, it might just get smooth, and you might end up ejecting this unexpectedly in your pocket. Going back to front, so that's kind of it. Started off great. It works. It's great as long as you're standing. You won't lose your knife. The compression lock. So originally I was a little bit worried about the compression lock. Getting my finger in there, it really hurt my fingernail after like the first couple of days with the knife, and I really just didn't want to use it. And what ended up happening was I had a really good weekend just cleaning out like a couple dozen boxes, and the way I found that I started closing the knife without looking at the knife or checking what I'm doing anymore is basically treating it like a liner lock. So I'm using the pad of my thumb to disengage the lock, and my finger closes the knife, and I use all my fingers to make sure that the detent is engaged, and it becomes a safe knife. It's fully closed and it won't come out. So I did find that initially I didn't like the compression lock, but thinking of it as just like a liner lock on the back, it's fantastic. They couldn't do a liner lock inside because it's a flipper. It would interfere with the mechanism, and you'd lose this really cool hidden jimping that they have on there. And I find that really does work when you're bearing down on something and you're holding the knife. You feel that jimping engage with your skin, and it works very well. So yeah, thinking of it as a liner lock on the back helped me with this guy, and I do enjoy the knife quite a bit. The thing I didn't enjoy, though, is when I'm doing food prep and meal prep with this knife, cutting up fruits, if the wheel gets wet. So it's pretty cool and awesome. Like, it's focus. It's almost like a Bic lighter flipper mechanism on this guy. And I found that while your hands are dry and the blade stock is dry, you get very good traction on this guy, and you always get a very firm, crisp deployment. Like, Spyderco finally figured out how to do a flipper, and that's amazing. Kudos to you guys. But I did find that if my hands were wet or greasy or anything, I didn't have traction, and the same thing vice versa. If the metal was wet, I didn't have enough traction to do deployments, and there's no secondary deployment option on this knife. So when you're looking at something like a Skaha, you can always push button and it will fire, or you can light switch, it'll fire. And there's quite generous jimping on this guy. This guy will always fire no matter what. Whereas this guy, you have no secondary option if you can't fire it. So that's the other little thing about it. If it's a Gent EDC normal light use city carry kind of knife, you'll have absolutely no problems with that or the deployment. But if you are using it like for whatever reason, camping, doing like prep for food, if you get that wet, it's not going to work too well. So that's it. So talking about stability, my first initial review of the knife, I was worried that this would be a knife in rotation instead of an actual dedicated user the entire month. One of the reasons why is that the washers in this guy, they're barely bigger than the pivot screw. And they're very dainty, tiny little phosphate bronze washers, and I was worried that that wouldn't give you enough blade stability, and that there's a little bit of rock in there, it wouldn't be as good, and the knife wouldn't wear very well over time. I was worried that the 2.5 millimeter blade stock wouldn't be strong enough, and then it occurred to me that possibly the hardest to use knife in the planet is a Victorinox or an Opinel. Like, just ask any kid. Like, you're probably chucking these into logs and stuff at scout camp, like trying to learn knife throwing with the Victorinox. Like, kids beat on these guys all the time, and they're fine. So I gave this guy a shot, and I used him for a whole month doing absolutely everything, and I'm very happy I did do that. It has not failed me in any way, shape, form. Out of the box, the knife was hair whittling sharp from Spyderco. Cutting down about 2 cardboard boxes, it went past working edge to completely dull. It couldn't even catch a corner of a paper if I'm like really trying to help it cut the paper, it wouldn't cut at all. About 5 minutes on Spyderco Sharp Maker, got a good working edge back on this, so it's cutting everything fine now, and just honing it maintains that edge. So the steel's good, metallurgy's good, no problems with chipping. I did, however, roll the blade recently, trying to break down some boxes of double wall cardboard, just holding it very firmly and just pushing through, and by the time I cut down the entire box into like little strips of scrap to go into recycling, there was a little bit of a roll in the blade. Just going to see if I can, probably won't show up on camera, but I can feel it with my finger now. Yeah, it's a really tiny roll, but it's just back here, and I can feel it with my finger when I'm rolling my, or pushing my thumb against it. So that I can sharpen out very easy, no problems at all. So I don't really consider that a failure in metallurgy, just I was possibly being a little bit too aggressive working that cardboard. So that's it for my use on this guy. I absolutely love the knife. It's going to be a permanent addition to my collection. I said it would be initially because I love Paul Alexander designs, but the knife just hasn't failed me. And the flipping action on this guy is fantastic. It's just a very satisfying, firm click whenever you engage the knife. So that's my front to back review from my observations of my knife. I do feel, however, I did get a perfect knife. There are quite a few people in the internet forums, other places, that are saying their knives are not as good as mine. By that, the tip is a little bit proud, or close. It's not proud, but it's closer to the tip, the edge. Using a depth gauge, the tip of my blade is about 1¼ millimeters recessed. So if I start following the blade stock right about here, the blade starts dropping away and the tip is down safely out of the way. In the month, I've tried cutting myself with this guy, and I just cannot hurt myself. I tried all different orientations in the pocket, couldn't get to hurt myself, and then I emailed Paul Alexander, and he had a couple of interesting insights from the engineering point of view. So his knives were also perfect, but he's the maker. You're going to assume he's going to get the better ones. But he did kind of go over how the internals, if you watch the first video, the liners are just a stamped sheet metal, so it's not super accurate. And if the liners have a little channel in them that a stop pin rides in, then that gauges where the blade is going to be in the open and closed positions. So if that is just a little bit out of spec on this end, it's actually amplified by an order of magnitude on the tip end. So it's like fractions of a millimeter on the stamping on this side is going to be a big issue on this side. So the Spyderco quality assurance, they are ensuring that nothing is proud, but there are some knives that are going to be closer to the front than others, and that a light pass would end up giving you a pretty good scratch. So his suggestion for that is to contact Spyderco. Spyderco has this thing called CQI, or Constant Quality Improvement. So they were going to take back any sort of feedback from you guys and warranty the knife. If it is out of spec and you are hurting yourself, it'll be warranted, and they're going to look at CQI, Constant Quality Improvement, and get that sorted on the manufacturing side so that all knives will be as perfect as my knife and you'll all be as lucky. So that's it for my 1 month and a bit of usage. As a dedicated carry, I absolutely love this knife. Basically, I think of it as like a folding steak knife. Very slim, very good in the hands, good grip, and no issues or failures at all. That said, my caveat is that this month has been a more of a light duty month with just cardboard, things like that. There's been absolutely no prying, no drilling, no kind of work like that. The edge is still quite good, so that's the edge I put on there. And even if I have a little bit of wood, so you can see, like, the blade, it has no problem. This is a seasoned, I think it's spruce or pine. Anyway, it's a pretty tough seasoned board, and it has no issues chopping through wood. So again, like, with regards to, like, is it a dainty knife? Whoopsie. No, it's not a dainty knife. It is pretty good as long as you have a competent user, because I am not one of those today. But yeah, as long as you're maintaining your knife, honing it properly, this knife won't fail you. It'll cut everything you throw at it. So that's my review for the Spyderco Ikuchi. Questions, comments, let me know. Thanks for your time.